musical instrument that I have that is said to be wherever it is, and it waits for the wind to strike a chord. As soon as the wind meets it, strikes a chord, it begins to play on its own accord. It is the Iolus that is likened to the poet waiting for inspiration. When you get inspiration and the wind meets the Iolus, it begins to play on its own accord. And it begins to play certain kind of music that is not determined by the poet, but by that inspiration. If you look at the analogy in the Bible where the man had his hand on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel. He was writing Mene, Mene, Tekel, and the person was there taking notes or looking at what the person is writing on the wall. Now, the Mene, Mene, Tekel, nothing had to do with the poet. So in certain circumstances, the words come at you, and when the words come at you, when the inspiration comes at you, you are helpless. You cannot say this is a verb or this is. Look at the case of the English poet, S.T. Coleridge. S.T. Coleridge was in his room one day, and suddenly he just saw a hand writing Kubla Khan. The title of the poem is Kubla Khan. Now, the hand was writing on the wall. Brief story. S.T. Coleridge was somebody who was only looking for inspiration, taking opium, taking all sorts of drugs to get to that point where he would write. But the inspiration was not coming, so he locked himself up in the room for a long time. And suddenly the hand showed up. Now, he locked himself in the room, and the hand would write Kubla Khan, literally write Kubla Khan. And he took his Bible and wrote Kubla Khan. Wrote to the point where there was a knock on the door. His girlfriend showed up, knocked on the door, and he was not ready to open the door. So the hand paused. So he paused as well. Now, pausing as well meant that he was waiting for the hand. The hand disappeared. He went to the door, answered the call, answered the knock. And by the time he came back, the hand never showed up again. So from the point where he stopped writing, the hand showed up. From the point where he stopped, the poem remained like that. Now, at that point, somebody else needed to complete the poem. You will see the difference in where the hand stopped and where the person tried to enter into, immerse himself into that sort of frame and write. So that is why I think getting very conscious of your adjectives, of your verbs, when you're writing in that state is one. Then the other scenario is where you want to make music. You know, some of these musicians, they rhyme their words. They want to make sure that the vowels are at the end of the line. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are. Because you want to rhyme, make a deliberate and conscious effort to rhyme. Yes, you may be thinking of your synonymy, your adjectives, your whatever, because you will need to rhyme because of the music, because of the sound. That is my take when you're looking at adjectives and
excuse me, but you realize that even when modern poetry doesn't have rhyme, it has rhythm. You know, the big fat boy goes home now, come sit down, what thou say. Even when it doesn't have rhyme, it has rhythm. And yeah, I agree, inspiration and all that. But at the end of the day, you have to tame your impulses. You know, you write inspiration even if I don't believe in inspiration. You have to set out to write good. If you write what comes to your head, you write shit. That's the truth. That's why we edit. You get inspired. You have to set your inspiration through a set of, quality checks. Very important quality checks. So even when you're not rhyming A, B, you need to have a beat to your poetry. You need to have rhythm to your poetry. You need to get your poetry make beautiful sense. And if your inspiration isn't beautiful, of what use is it to your poetry? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to the word beats me. You understand what I'm saying? We are we are subject to inspiration, we are subject to the whims of the muses, but then again, they are only that, and we are human, you know. I'm Catholic, and at least I wanted to be a monk at the time, and there is a psalm we used to sing in the monastery. The psalm goes, what is man that you should care for him, yet you have made him little less than God. You know, you are a God, creatively God. And what is inspiration to a God? You control it. You cannot say it because the inspiration says you should write about the wind. Then you write, you know, you couple of words that do not mean anything. They sound good but mean nothing. That is not, you know, you've done nothing. That is out there for
Actually, I'm on his side, and that is also because I don't think inspiration is. So if your inspiration says you write blah 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 blah, and that doesn't make any sense to you as a poet, like it doesn't define you. It's not what you want to say, because like the handwriting on the wall, you can't tell me that is the handwriting what the poet intends to say. Perhaps the poet is going through a difficult relationship and he wants to express that in the poetry, and the inspiration is telling is writing another thing, perhaps in another language. It's not the same thing. So I think inspiration, if ever there is a thing like that, or we should go with a thing like that, it's something that, you know, helps you to express yourself. So you now you are the one that controls the, you know, the expression, what exactly you want to write, and how you want to write it. So you can't tell me that it's going to be arbitrary. We have to control it. So that's what I think. So inspiration is not basically equal to content. So your content is different. So the inspiration gives you, I mean, the way to express yourself, like the content you have.
A lot of the time in other markets outside of Nigeria, they always split the creation process into 3 thereabouts. So what happens is there's someone who is inspired to create a piece of music. That can never be the final product. They would never allow it because, like you said, if you just follow your inspiration, then there's no structure. You've not really created anything. You're just allowing something to happen. You have to refine. You have to know what is the right thing to do in the next step. So after you create the piece of music, you give it to someone who is going to lay it out and say, okay, we don't need this here, we don't need that here, let's have something else here. Let us increase this, reduce that, make this sound far away, make this sound close. And after that, there's still one more person who's going to take the final product and say whether it is good or not. So in that context, it's like music goes through so much to get to where it is, to get to the final thing you listen to that you enjoy. So you have to, I mean, in the sense of being conscious about your verbs and adjectives, it's like if you have some limits, or you have, let's say you don't study any poetry, you don't read poetry on your own, and you say, okay, I want to be a poet and write something. It might be good, but chances are it will be bad, because you are inspired, you learn from what other people have done before. You learn from their styles, things that make them who they are. You know, so putting these restrictions, knowing that, okay, maybe today I should write with less adjectives, so I should write more adjectives, so I should push myself to use adjectives I wouldn't normally use, then you are structuring the essence of your poem.
Marketable. You want to refine it. It does not discount the fact that really there could be inspiration. It does not discount the fact that they could be edited. But we find that most of the time when you have a piece of creativity, it passes through that editing process. It will spoil the originality of the work. It does not discount the fact that it has to be edited. That is the point I'm trying to make, that let's say for instance, the work has to say it has a certain rhyme. You would realize that a certain reading, you would realize that if you're talking about reading is a deliberate choice of stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. You will realize as well that if you're looking at words from stressed, unstressed, to give a particular beat like you were talking about yesterday, you will be deliberately taking certain words that have heaviness and lightness.
No.
Heavy, sorry.
I'm very sorry. I am very sorry.
That's what I'm trying to say. So my take is this: at the point where you have inspiration is relevant. At the point when you want to edit it, give it a business model, It's relevant. We cannot discount, say, oh, it's inspiration, because it's inspiration, it's not useful. After your inspiration, like you just said, it could pass through the process. Give it a business model, give it a certain aura for it to be ascertained to be at a certain level. That's the so at both levels. You may want to be conscious of your adjective, your adverb. When you want to do light stress, stress, it's that at the point where you want to make it a process. But the thing it can come at you. For instance, sometimes I want to write a poem. I just wonder, that's why this garden here interests me a lot. I just wonder of, sit under the tree, and I take in the whole of the place, and yeah, some would do all kinds, but I just take in the whole of the place. The word just come at me, I put it down, leave it, and I go. I was talking with you a couple of minutes ago that let the words, let them come at you, but deliberately making a conscious effort to put your tresses, your adjectives and adverbs, that is also relevant. That's the point.
No, but you not seem to understand that. Okay, so the words come, right? They come like a comprehension, like an essay, right? That's how they come. Just a continuous stream of words. Yeah, in the parlor, sitting down around the table, is with the camera, taking pictures of us. You can create reading from that. There are things you use, enjambments. You break your lines. You don't. When I say you edit, I don't mean you. I said you subject your inspiration, subject your muse to editing processes. I do not mean you have to remove every important word or every word you're emotionally attached to. There are ways you can, whatever your favorite poem. Think of my favorite poem in the world is Homer's, for instance, or J.P. Clark's Ibadan. Rust,
Scrolling. Like
Rust and gold flung and scattered among 7 hills like broken china in the sun. That thing has to have been edited. Nobody in this life thinks that way. Nobody walks around and goes, rust and gold, flung and scattered in the sun. Nothing. So what I'm saying is, the inspiration comes, right? But you have to subject it to anything. There are reading, rust and gold, flung and scattered in the sun. Among 7 hills like broken china in the sun. You break your lines, force people to read it a particular way. Ocean Vuong does that here, for instance. You go, and I was with a boy who's more that. You bring that under it. And you continue to have the same number of syllables. I don't mean you have to do it there and then at the point of inspiration, no. But these are things you need to do to read sensibly. For instance, I was talking yesterday about Tade Badiora's Sahara Testament. 1,000 portraits ranked A, B, A, B. 1,000 portraits ranked A, B, A, B. That is not inspiration, that is discipline. That is discipline. That is, my favorite poem in that book is the one is talking about the market woman who speaks a rapid fire mixture of Bambara and French. That's not inspiration, that is observation. We tend to exaggerate inspiration over other things that are important to us as writers. Poets tend to talk like inspiration is unimportant to prose writers. It is very important to prose writers. But a prose writer cannot just be inspired, he has to research. Think about writing about war, and you're inspired to write about war, and you know absolutely nothing about guns. Inspiration is not going to teach you about guns. You have to find an encyclopedia of guns and read it, and know what an Uzi is or what an AK-47 is, You have to do that. And I feel if you mix inspiration with the rigors of research and the rigors of editing, your work will be better, that's my 2 pence on it. I might be wrong.
I have something to say though. So, what if, inspiration, comes from the feeling of not being restricted? Like, for instance, before I started writing poetry, I hated it, I was not the biggest fan. So like, because I used to see Shakespearean, like people follow rhymes, something, something, something. At the end, it must rhyme. So like, looking at all that, if like I were to ever attempt it, it would be stressful like for me. But then I went for a poetry fest, and then I just saw spoken word. So I was like, okay, it's like telling a story in a way, but just using words. And then I discovered that I actually don't have to follow all these rules and regulations. And at that moment, I wrote my first poem. So I feel like inspiration might come from like you said, you went to the garden, and so maybe you actually felt like you were free from like maybe your daily routine or something. I just wanted to chip in that.
So, what's I'm trying to like?
Writer is about verbs and adjectives when writing, and the thing about writing is that the writer themselves will have their final edit, right, before it goes to the editor. And people write different ways. Person A would just pour it out and then flog it into something, and person B would edit as they write. The thing with poetry is that Richard mentioned rhythm. Inspiration is great. Inspiration might come with rhythm, but you're trying to make something. There has to be discipline. There's rigor involved. You're forming something, right? And necessarily, you would have to consider the words you're using to make what you're trying to output. And it's interesting because he had mentioned something about seeing a big red car, and person A saying it's driving down the street, and person B saying it's waltzing down the street. That's a choice. So two people could essentially convey the same idea, but they're trying to, they're painting the same picture, but different ways, right? And to be fair, I have no idea. I guess it's an individual thing, whether you're creating it for yourself or you want the audience, the reader, to see a certain thing, right? Or to make certain meaning of it. I don't know that you can impose meaning, no matter how hard you try, really. I do not think that you can impose meaning on the next person. Well, that's me. But certainly, I think that you will necessarily have to consider your choice of words in terms of the things you're putting. Like we're saying, verbs, adjectives, how we're describing things, the doing of things and all that. Are you conveying a certain tenderness? Are you conveying a certain violence? It could be the same thing that we're looking at, and A is doing it this way and B is doing it that way. And just necessarily, especially if you're trying to hammer it into something, in poetry there's meter. So if you're trying to hammer it into something, your first draft, if you're the sort of person that pours it out, right, might not follow that. But you know that your edit will, because you're going to subject your work to rigor. And the truth is that even during the editing process, there is inspiration. You can, I don't mean the editor, as the writer, your edit. You can be done with it but not be happy with it. You could sit with it for a year or two, you could do other things, and then it comes to you, and it fits perfectly into the mold that you had intended for that bit of work. If you wanted it to be a certain, to follow a certain meter, for example. If you're the sort of person that does that, and it would perfectly work. It's yes, this is the thing I was looking for. But it takes discipline, it takes observation, it takes rigor. And necessarily, you have to be conscious of the verbs, the adjectives, because eventually when you're happy with it, if you're ever happy with it, right, those are the things, that's what makes it up. That's what conveys the picture. Your choice.
I think this one is to tell you that the poet shouldn't impart too much or import too much of his meaning on the poem. But how can you write without having meaning behind your head, in your head? How can you write without trying to make meaning? That's the first one. The second one, they will now say that, the poet shouldn't explain himself. Why shouldn't a poet explain himself? You should explain yourself. Explain yourself. Because the nature of poetry is very ambivalent. It's neither here nor there. And you will find people asking you, what do you mean here? Why do you use these words? If it's just inspiration, when someone walks up to you and says, why this word? You would not have an answer. I know somebody who never writes in block letters. You won't find a capital letter in his book. And if it's just inspiration, a fan walks up to you and says, Professor Bighead, writer, poet, why only small letters? And you'd be like, I was inspired to. It's a truthful answer, but it's a stupid answer, in my opinion. It doesn't cut it. That was the thing.
It wasn't exactly something that wasn't called. There was no aesthetic to it or anything. It was just a bunch of words that helped me get through to the next day and the next day. It was over time. It took about 2 years for me to start finessing and all that kind of stuff. But the one thing that was constant with my poetry, I think after the first 3 months, was I stopped using capital letters. It just didn't work for me. And it doesn't exactly matter how much inspiration you have. When I started writing, I would just write whatever came to my head. I could sit down in my corner in Indie or one night and I could do like 3, 4, 5 poems in one night. Go to sleep, wake up tomorrow, go to class angry, come back to the same shit again. But when I started seeing this thing as more than just getting to the next day, the inspiration was still there. The inspiration is still there. I still write based on inspiration. If I am not inspired, I do not pick up my pen to write poetry. It doesn't happen. But with the inspiration, I write with my dictionary and my thesaurus beside me. It can, because there are some times when I want to convey that I am. That has actually helped with my vocabulary, because there are sometimes you want to convey that you're angry, but angry doesn't cut it. This is not just anger. It doesn't feel like anger. It's more like something just irks me, and like, okay, strike out anger. Put this one there, and then you want to use a word, you're like, it doesn't work. It rhymes. I don't even rhyme it, but it rhymes. It follows the rhythm, but it doesn't convey exactly what you're feeling. If you go with your inspiration alone, you write poetry, the best thing you come up with is average. You can never get top-notch poetry with just inspiration. My favorite poem that's like not my own is Emily Dickinson's Because I Couldn't Stop for Death. Because I couldn't stop for death, the kindly stopped for me, the carriage about ourselves and immortality, and then everything else that follows. That, you cannot tell me she sat down and wrote that and that was just everything, that no editing came into it, because it's too rhythmical. There's no rhyming, but the whole thing is rhythmical. If you read the whole poem, it's very, very rhythmical. And somebody voiced it on a poet I know voiced it once, and he was beautiful. Like, you know that, yes, this is poetry. I think Nigerian poets have been put under a responsibility of poetry has to be this flower thing. It has to flow. It has to, I don't know, be like water and stuff. It is. There was. I am on this poet. This was a group of writers, and there was this big argument about poetry and stuff, where somebody was saying poetry has to be like this, poetry has to be like this, and then most of us are just free form. Most of my poets is prosaic. It's like I'm telling a story. That's why I stopped calling myself a poet at some time. I'm a storyteller. I can take a poem and turn it into a short piece, 500 words, 1,000 words. The same poem. I did it with one story. The same poem, into a story. I'm trying to turn the short story into a script now. I'm stuck somewhere. So it's not, I don't know. Inspiration alone does not cut it. You will get nowhere with that. You have to, put in a lot of work and discipline in writing your poem.
Keep it short. Yeah. I think left One of the most celebrated poets since forever, and probably after we're dead, is Shakespeare. For whatever reason, everybody mourns about having to have read Shakespeare in secondary school or whenever you did. But it is one of the most celebrated poets ever, and is the standard for a lot of people. And over time, it's been the standard. And you're definitely not going to tell me that he sat down with inspiration and wrote all the sonnets and poems and everything. And poets of his time were very particular about things like meter and stuff like that. And meter itself is a rule, so you're writing following a rule. Definitely inspiration can fall from above the muse and maybe give you a few lines following the meter. But I believe that a lot of what goes into putting all of this out. So next thing, so you have to, all these things they all go hand in hand. Inspiration comes, then you work it out into something better. I feel like the reason why someone would sit and tell me that I'm just going to write my poem as it comes and leave it that way, it's because we have somehow romanticized the idea of poetry. And poetry is a romantic idea for so many people, those who understand it and those who do not understand it. So, we see it as this, we see it as something, it's like a joy, like it's just fascinating. We look at poetry with a romantic perspective, and so we enjoy the idea that something this beautiful just pours out of us, like it's just flowing out from our veins or something. So we enjoy that idea. You don't want to believe that something beautiful could have come out of hard work. You get? So it's just a very romantic idea, having to think that beauty is in ease all the time. So beauty isn't always found in what's simple, what's easy to get, what comes by, just like that. It's in all the work that goes into it. It's in all that work. So we do have to stop romanticizing the idea of poetry. I'm not much of a poet. I rarely write poetry. I'm more of a prose writer. And I know I hate editing. I just like to write and be done with it, but it doesn't work that way. You have to go back and go back and go back till you feel like nobody wants to put anything mediocre into the world. You don't want to have something basic attached to your name. So, and that requires work. I mean, you'd have to be super lucky to just write something, boom, and.
For me, like we need to realize that, especially in Nigeria, to think that poetry is the realm for anger and love and longing and regret. But one of the most beautiful books of poetry that I have read is the report called Tipolo's Hound. And Tipolo's Hound is not a book of emotions; it's a book of history. In that book is a book-length poem. He chronicles the history of the expressionist movement in Paris. That is what the book is about. Writing about painters and their works and their lives. That is poetry. That's history. That is poetry. We can, if we realize that we can do a lot with poetry, we realize that inspiration isn't, the only thing. Hard work and choice. Choice is, back to what you were saying. When you realize that the work I have to do is a lot greater than inspiration can do for me, then we realize that choice becomes a lot more important than inspiration. So if you decide that you want to write about Osogbo and you begin writing 10 pages inspiration, 20 pages, by the time you're in the third decade of writing, the 30th page, or around the 30th page, you realize that it's drying up, it's no longer there. Then you have to start looking for Tony Falola, one day Abimbola, or Wale Soyinka to figure out, what have these people said, then turn their thoughts into verse. Then your work stops being about point of inspiration, but about translating the other people's ideas into verse. Poetry is a lot more than just, I love, or I'm angry, or I regret, or I want, it could be a lot more. I mean, that's fine. I should stop though. Actually.
Getting I get edits, I keep them, I still keep the original, I go back to the original, writing it more often. Then I guess one time I was at, I met with Richard, and then Richard was talking about how, you can write, and then when you write is you are just attempting to say what you want to say. You have to take time and work on it over again. And then also putting a bit of interest in music and the creation of music. Music felt so creation, something which is almost what should be happening in poetry. Where apart from just this equipment is there, you can just get a beat and then you can start playing, people feel it works. You have to actually spend enough time understanding the beat, mastering the beat, dispersing the sound, which one goes to the left, which one goes to the right. Even before creating the music, the technicals and that, and then how that in a long way, when the music comes out, you don't see that. And then I was saying something once about how editing at its best form should be something after an edit is done, you can't really notice that edit is done. It should be that close. And then I begin to kind of wonder how for my personal writing, how if editing is not really because I think that's how it will we write even if it's conscious or inspirational, whatever. We are done writing, and even at first writing if it's perfect. What if it's just some just a doorway to the real plan you want to write? What if it's you can expose more to it? So which I think basically the most important for me, which for me my own personal approach to my own writing, I kind of when I'm done doing the first writing now, recently since maybe so I go back and then I really put my focus more on my verbs and my adjectives, and then kind of in the dialogue of understanding is this the perfect space for this? Is this even needed at all? Or is this strong enough for what I want? And then I kind of realized these verbs and adjectives are basically from my own writing what I used to kind of describe or kind of open up a space for people to come, because I think from my own kind of writing is I don't really think it's just there's this first part, first stanza, and then it's all different, and then the last stanza might be quite distinct from what you've already from the top. So it just goes all off like that, and then so I begin to question more why is this part like this and why is this part like this? Why is this word here? And why am I arranging it this way and this way? And I feel at that point I began to see more of how creating the first process is not physically. At times it might be. I think more attention needs to be placed outside writing. So you have done delivering the first draft. You have to go back to it and work on it again. And I think the discussion from around is just I was planning to just show 4 slides and then also play trade music. Because personally I'm interested in how descriptions work in music and in poetry, and how that kind of create a space for the listener, the reader, to engage the world that is being written. That is being on, and then so I will just every time I read like this, I just wonder, because like personally, like when I read like other people's poem, I like look more into their choices of what's what they say. Why is this word and then how does this line and the word in this line relate to the next line? And how does that like propel the whole narration, the whole story further down? And I think like, I mean, I'm not sure if it's that like, that's something like a way to edit, but I think like for me it brings me like more close and complete the work in the sense of aside like so like this from the report of so this goes after the so just wondering like basically like I mean aside it I was supposed to also like show the slide for option 4 that was from before. Like I basically sent that in the email later to everybody to get. So yeah. I mean like I said earlier, I was no good for a conversation. I was so glad like we're going to